The next half of our program will be questions from the audience. Jake Hawes and I will be going around with microphones. If you would like to just raise your hand and we'll come over to you with a microphone. If you prefer not to speak into the microphone, we have some index cards and pencils, so you can write it down, and I'll bring it up to Jim. And Jim's going to be the referee because he's meaner than I am. So.
Can you make sure the mics are turned on?
Yes, let's make sure all three mics are on, please. Because my colleagues are so spontaneous.
Here's a question over on the right.
Pull your microphone closer so that it's, there you go.
Is this on?
Go ahead.
We're saying the switch needs to be turned on, not accidentally turned off on the bottom. Slide switch. No, I think they heard, but the listeners on TV and radio may not have heard.
How's that?
That was, okay.
Would you like for her to repeat the question, Ken?
Yeah, please.
Please repeat the question.
Okay, when the request for proposals went out from the city, from LMU, it was for incineration. It was for
Refuse-derived fuel.
Refuse-derived fuel. What other options does a place like Logansport have?
Well, the first thing I would do is separate the questions of how to manage waste and how to make it energy. And the best answers to both of those are going to be the answers that create more jobs. The worst answer to both is if you try to combine them by turning waste into energy, which is not actually what happens as I described. I believe the request for proposals was specific to refuse-derived fuel, so rather than asking the bigger question of what's the best way to deal with our waste or to make energy, they tried to come up with the conclusion already, and they went the worst way they could. If the question is on waste issues, the answer is to do as Austin, Texas, San Francisco, many other cities, and even rural. There's a rural county in Ohio that's done a really good job at pursuing zero waste, which is where we create far more jobs through reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost. It's a simple version of it, but there are a lot of pieces of that. Austin, Texas actually has a 300-page plan for how they're going to get away from 95% use of landfills and incinerators, but they don't have them down there, and maximize all those solutions. With energy, I think the answer is similar, except instead of reduce, reuse, recycle, you have conservation, efficiency, and then clean renewables, not the smokestack kind like they call biomass and landfill gas stuff, but wind, solar, energy storage. Those types of solutions create far more jobs and are clean and healthy for the community, and they can be done in a lot of places, particularly here.
There's a good place you can go to find out how this zero waste system operates. Just go down the road a little bit to Subaru over in Lafayette, East Lafayette. West Lafayette is where they have a university that I won't mention. But Subaru contends that they have a zero waste operation at their plant.
Actually, let me clarify on that, because some of the companies are out there talking about zero waste to landfill, which is a code word for we burn the stuff that we don't landfill and don't manage to recycle. And so you need to know that that's some of it is PR on these companies.
Okay. Good.
Good evening. My name is Steve Kitchell.
My family and I own a small family farm about 2.5 miles east of the proposed site where this monstrosity would be built. The experts have just told us that it is going to be a burn facility creating more toxic emissions than just about anything else we could do. That enough should scare everybody in this room, and I'm sure it has. But they've also brought up a couple things that I hadn't thought about. And all of these plants, even though they're tiny plants, have a lot of down days. But if this community is committed to 6,000 tons of garbage a day, and the plant's down for a couple months, 60 times 6,000, I don't even know how much that is. Maybe somebody can tell me, a mathematician.
Hey, Steve?
Yes?
Try to turn it into a question.
Try to turn it into a question, okay? What would we do with hundreds of thousands of tons of other people's garbage sitting around Cass County? Is that a question for you?
Sure. And again, I mentioned in my presentation, and again, it came up during our lunch discussion with some of your city officials. And again, I do want to say I appreciate them coming, even though they were kind of supporting this project, but they did, you know, to their credit, take some time to chat about it. But as I mentioned earlier, their response was, well, we'll just send the trash back. But that's not what happens. You know, if Pyrolyzer somehow succeeds in signing contracts with some, you know, cities, counties, et cetera, for garbage, it will come, and it will come, and it will come, and it's Pyrolyzer's breach of contract if they're not being able to deal with it, but it's Logansport's, you know, pile of trash in a lot of ways. Because, you know, and we've seen that as, you know, the examples I gave at the beginning of my talk about the ATG gasification plant in Richland, Washington. Wasn't working. The radioactive hazardous waste piled up and was left untreated. In Hawaii, medical waste gasification plant did not had repeated breakdowns. They got busted for illegal stockpiling of medical waste, and the same could happen here. I think, you know, what the city council guys, because the other issue raised by your question is, well, what happens about energy generation? They said, well, we can turn a switch and have the natural gas. Well, at least you would say that's a sure thing, right? But one of the main things that we found in researching the claims in Pyrolyzer's proposal and noticing the large amount of omissions is they don't address these questions of what happens if the equipment doesn't work or it's down for extended periods of time. There is no emissions data. There's no similar plant. You know, one of their two reference plants had their contracts canceled. So I think you raised some very good points, and yet without any emissions data, without any information about generation of electricity other than PR claims, without any environmental review being done by the state of Indiana Environmental Agency, the city apparently is poised to, or is certainly thinking about, signing a contract. And this is where I think the residents of Logansport need, whatever your opinion is, now is the time to speak up. And I think as more facts go on the table, I think you do have an opportunity to change the possible outcome here. And I'm confident that if you come to the decision, as we've seen in so many communities across this country, that maybe this isn't what you're being told, you know, what Pyrolyzer is claiming isn't as good as it's claimed, that I'm confident you can stop it. But these are the issues you need to raise, not just with us here tonight, but I would encourage folks to pick up the phone tomorrow and ask the same questions and raise the same concerns with your officials.
So to add to that, most likely they will have to, I mean, there's only so much they can stockpile on the site, and someone's going to have to pay to divert that to area landfills. And so that's going to come out of some of the contracts, whether it's the one with Logansport or someone else. Someone's going to pay for that. And at first it might be Pyrolyzer, but you better watch every contract that can come by your community, your county, and your city, because there may be contracts that pass those costs on to you as taxpayers or ratepayers. There's also the big issue of how they make money. These things make money by getting paid to take waste. if they're getting paid to take waste, but then can't make that money because they then have to turn around and pay to landfill it somewhere, then that's more that they're falling into the hole economically. Same thing if they switch to natural gas. If they flip the switch, as they keep talking about, then they're now using a fuel they have to buy as opposed to getting paid for their fuel. And so that's going to change the economics a lot as well. And any of these circumstances are going to drive a deep debt into this community. And trust me, those dollars are going to get passed on to someone somehow. These companies are not dumb when they sign contracts. Usually the suckers end up being whatever public body, whatever government signs the other end of the contract. And there's also the waste product, the char that they have to make. That is part of their process, about 20–30% probably, at least with normal incinerators, it's about 30%. With this type, it might be a little less. But for every 100 tons you put in, you get some tons out of a solid waste product. And they're pretending that this is going to be some building material everyone wants to build with and buy. But that's never happened. They have failed across the industry to make this a commodity, and that will end up having to pay, someone has to pay to landfill that as well. So there'll be more trains and trucks bringing that to landfills.
The second part of my question is, and I haven't seen any figures on the cost of this plant, but I've been in construction my whole life. I see $100+ million for this plant. And if this plant does not function full time, who's going to pay for that? The taxpayers of Logansport or Cass County? Who?
That depends on the contract that's being written. Presumably, there's not going to be any bonding by the city of Logansport to support this plant. That means that the Pyrolyzer company has to go out and raise the funds somehow in some national or international market. And the question is that if what they want is a contract in hand that says that the electricity will be bought by Logansport. And Pyrolyzer, under those circumstances, would be responsible for paying for the plant, but they have to raise the money. If they can't raise the money, but you've got a political situation where you have a mayor and a council that are committed to seeing this project all the way through, then they may come up with the idea that bonding would be a good idea, where the city of Logansport would guarantee the bonds.
Anything from the other two panel members on that economic question?
No, it's not.
Next question.
I have a lot of questions, but the main question I want to ask, and I'm not sure any of these gentlemen can answer it. If this is such a great idea, and it is a great idea, I guess, if it's that great, IPL, Indiana Power and Light, I think I read where they're going to build a $600 million generating plant somewhere around Indy, but they're going to use natural gas. If this is such a great idea, why aren't Duke and Nipsco and IPL and all those companies that are way bigger than Logansport, why aren't they jumping on this with both feet? If it's such a good deal and they could make money doing it. I don't know that any of these gentlemen can answer that, but that's my question.
And I think you answered your own question in a lot of ways. I mean, once you look at the basics, okay, how much has any facility of this size been built? As I pointed out, the largest one is a fraction of the size. Even Pyrolyzer's own website, their largest unit, 150 tons a day of garbage versus the proposal that got everybody excited of 6,000 tons a day. Let's just say we can do all this stuff, but it's never before been done. No emissions data, no electric generation data, a lot of failures of these technologies. So I think that's the answer. And that's not to say at some point in the future, I'm not anti-technology, and we need good technological solutions as well as better practices of conservation and efficiency, and always trying to get cleaner technologies. But this stuff, at least now, clearly isn't doing what its proponents say. And I think that's the answer to your question.
I just wondered, and I'll be honest with you, I'm awfully opinionated, and I've tried to keep an open mind about all this. I wondered how the folks from the city reacted when you presented some of the scientific data, because a lot of what we've heard, we think, and obviously you're in a room that's on one side of this issue, not both. I just wondered how they reacted, because I think the data we've heard from them is pretty vague. That's my first question, how they reacted. And secondly, like most issues, you have 300 people on one side, 300 people on the other, and 17,000 in the middle that don't really, and none of us honestly know a lot of the data that you're throwing out. We don't know if it's the truth or not the truth, or, you know, we believe what we want to believe in a lot of cases. You've been in these situations before. In a town with a mayor who's obviously committed to this project, and I'm not saying they're wrong. Obviously, if they're right, he goes down in history as a genius. And that's just a fact. You have a council who's committed to just about everything the mayor says. And so they're on board with this. How do 300 people in a town of 18 or 19,000 do anything to stop this project if those folks are committed and they control the dollars and the votes? And again, I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying if the data comes out and we get more people to believe, you know, one way or the other, what does a small group in a town our size do? It's a train, and it's moving down a track.
Yeah, I think good questions. First, as I mentioned, we appreciated, and ask my colleagues here to chime in, but I thought the discussion over lunch was cordial. I appreciated sitting down and sharing food with them, and we had a good discussion. And they said they were going to look into it. I would say when and I think you raised a good point. Regular folks don't know who to believe. Most of what I talked about today was straight out of Pyrolyzer's own documents. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at page 7 of their proposal under advantages of their process that claims, quote unquote, there is no air pollution. And look at other parts of their document, including page 17, which talks about, well, there probably be hazardous air pollutants, but it'll be within the limits. So, I just say, just look at what they say. How is it that they cite 2 reference plants, which are a fraction of the size, and there's no emissions data? Very curious. And I pointed that out, and they thought, well, isn't there a chart with some emissions data? I pointed out that's not what it says. So they said they'd look into it more. We'll see what happens. And it's the last part of your question about, well, what can several hundred people in a town do? You can protect your town. I've worked in hundreds of communities from coast to coast, every shape, color, and size. And these things, what you're experiencing here, has happened for better or for worse in so many places. But in place after place where companies come in and make claims and people do their basic homework, and often they're up against their own government officials, the communities can prevail. And also take it a step further and try to find some real solutions to the very real problems that are supposedly being addressed. So I would not be distressed about it. I think the fact that some of your city officials came and took some time to sit down with us is a positive thing. And but they need to hear from you and ask them, so what do you think about that claim on page 7? This is a claim made in response to an official request for proposals in pursuit of a government contract. And I said, I think it raises some pretty serious issues. And I think they took it seriously. We'll see what happens. But so just, do what I did. Look at their proposal, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. There's some big gaps, some serious questions, some serious contradictions.
You have already a tremendous advantage, and that is you have an organization here which seems to be very limited in the number of people. I think it's 4. But these are people who have put together this meeting today that drew this many interested people together. There's a list outside for your email address. Make sure your email address is on that list. And then start working with the people who form the core of this group to say, how do we do this? And you know your city council members, you know the mayor, you know lots of other people who know the city council members and who know the mayor, and you talk to them and you work on it because it's important to you. And whatever brought you here tonight And I think the evidence that you've received tonight, and I have very poor scientific background myself, but I'm convinced that these fellows know what they're talking about. That's because I spent most of the day listening to them. They've given you the evidence that you need. What you need to do now is to say, I'm committed to seeing something happen. I'm committed to protecting my community from this, what could be a financial as well as a physical disaster. And what you do is you just go and you run a campaign. And we had people walking in front of the building with signs earlier. Well, we could have people walking with a different set of signs in front of the city council the next time through. I'm not suggesting disruptive behavior, but I'm suggesting that standard raising your voice, as we do in democracy, is what's necessary here. This is a great chance, and Logansport's the right size city to do it.
Let me just add a little bit to that, and thank you for your last comment about democracy. Democracy is what kills incinerators. And the people power I see in this room can totally do it. I've worked with a lot of communities, and Bradley's worked with many more even. And oftentimes it starts with like 4 people around a kitchen table, and then you figure out how to turn the town on its head, and you do it. I'm committed, and I know Bradley is, to working with this local group and everyone who signs up the sheet, and to work with them to make sure that they know what has worked in other communities. And with the numbers I see here, there's no doubt in my mind that you can stop this plant. I'll just say that right now. And it could be stopped at the city level. It could be stopped at the county level. It's a little harder to stop things at the state level, so I recommend focusing on those local levels, and there's no doubt that you can do it.